I have what looks like a unified mess here, if that's a thing. Probably with me it is. I was asked if I would show how to start a project. What I did was I pulled out several examples, and then I'll show you what I kind of have in mind. What I was trying to do was think about what could I do to give you an idea of my process, which I'm going to tell you, I'm not this big cross-stitch expert, and so I just do what I was taught and then what I have just self-learned over many years of doing cross-stitch. I went online and looked for free cross-stitch patterns, and you can find them all over the place. This one was off of Pinterest. I pulled this one off of the Fat Quarter Shop, but this of course is going to be too big of a project for me to do, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. And then the other one that I pulled off is this one. I thought, they were kind of small projects, and it was going to have to be something that I would either use or give away. I wasn't just going to make something just to make something. This one, like I said, was off of Pinterest, and this is pretty small. It didn't come with any instructions. It may have if I would have been able to navigate myself to the site, but every time I did, I was having trouble getting it to download, and I was trying to do it off my iPad, and I finally just gave up. So I just took a snapshot of it, like a screenshot, and saved it, and then decided to go ahead and blow it up a little bit and then print it out. I have the legend, which is what I need, and it's a very small project, not a lot of stitches, 43 by 44 stitches. And then this one, of course, is a little bit bigger, but I could definitely use this for a Christmas card if I wanted to, or a little Christmas gift if I wanted to frame it. But when you end up with a pattern, wherever you get the pattern, it's going to include a legend, which is in most cases going to show you what number of thread, meaning the color of thread, that you're going to be using for your cross stitch pattern. I showed you these when I was doing the rabbit sampler. Now, this is using Aurora Floss thread colors, and it will tell you what they're using. But most cases, you can go online, sometimes the DMC site, maybe even this Aurora Floss site. I've never heard of Aurora Floss, but they will show you often equivalents. So if you just Googled Aurora Floss DMC thread equivalent, it should bring them up. But the worst case scenario, you can just kind of take a look at this, take your picture into the store with you when you're looking at the thread, and say, okay, well, obviously this color doesn't match anything on here, but you could potentially use it for like this color here, which is the 5008. It's obviously a little darker. You could, certainly just find something that comes pretty close to that and call it good. So you could do that too. You don't have to use the exact colors that they say. I often will do that if I don't want to go buy new thread and just use my thread up that I have. Even this coffee one shows you a legend. This one gives you two different versions. On this one, I was not able to get a legend. I, for whatever reason, could not find it, or it wouldn't print. Now, this is a DMC pattern, and my guess is you could go get this off of the DMC website. If you go to DMC, they give you lots of free patterns because they want you to buy their floss. So, because it says like www.dmc.com. And so if you go there, then you can pick up the pattern or download the pattern or print it out or however you want to do it. And then you could see what colors they're telling you to use. I think 666 is this red, if I remember correctly, just off the top of my head. I think that's generally is this red color. But you could find a brown, to match whatever this little reindeer might, come to your mind, and with you envision a color with it. This looks like a burgundy or a darker red, so you could pull something out of your stash or just buy something that is close. Most generally, patterns will also have where it says the model is stitched on 32 count flax linen by Zweigart using 1 strand of overdid floss and 2 linen threads. And then the fibers used from this one, they use the Weeks Dye Works, which is also very popular for some people. I have never used it. But Dye Works thread equivalents in DMC is also very easy to find if you Google that. So then you can find your colors. And so what they're saying is, okay, well, this is what we stitched it on, and this is what it looks like. But it will also generally tell you here where it shows you, see if I can get in a little closer. It'll show you the stitch count. And so this particular project is 196 width by 88 height. So that's how many stitches it is across and from the top to bottom. The other thing it will show you is that you have some options. So if you decide to use 28 count, it's going to be 14 inches wide by 6¼ inches high. If you, which in other words, 28 count, which they're using linen, you always divide in 2. So like even weaves and linen, so when you stitch over 2 threads, you just divide the count in 2, and that will tell you that if you're using an Aida cloth, what Aida cloth count you should get. So here would be a 32 count. This is the size it would be, 36 count, 40 count. Anyway, so what this does is they're saying, okay, well, if you do it on the 28 count, this is how wide the project itself is going to be. But then they tell you what the cut size is. The cut size is 20 inches by 12½ inches. So if you can see up here, the project is 14 by 6¼ So they're leaving about 6 inches, which is about 3 inches on each side of the project. And they're going to want you to do that top and bottom. They're doing the same here. It's about 6 inches. 12½ is how they tell you to cut the fabric. So you know that when you get your piece of fabric, you're going to need, when you're looking for your fabric, you have to find a fabric that is at least 20 inches by 12½. At least that. And then, of course, you can always, cut it down to this size if you want to save pieces for later. Now, they always recommend at least 2 to 3 inches on all sides of your project if you're going to frame it. Depends on what your project is. You can judge for yourself on whether that is going to be necessary for you. For me, I aim for 2 to 3 inches. If I cannot find a piece of fabric that will fit my project at 3 inches on all sides of my finished piece, then I just go for 2 inches. Now, I know when they're framing it, they may balk a little bit at that, but a lot of times large pieces of really nice fabric is very expensive, and maybe you can afford that and maybe you can't. And skimping a little bit at 2 inches isn't going to, I don't think, hurt you too badly. But that's up to you. So I just wanted to show you that in most cases this is what it will give you. This is another rabbit sampler that I purchased. I'll show you the front of it in a minute. But they're just giving you the DMC colors, and in general that's pretty much what you get is DMC colors. This is the front of it. So here is a Guardian Angel one that I've had for a good number of years. You can tell, $2.50. They're not $2.50 anymore. 1991 Leisure Arts. It'll give you an awful lot of instructions, stitching tips. They even show you how to do some of the stitches. But down here, see, it'll tell you that they used Misty Gray Linen 26 count. And 26 count would be like a 13 count if you were going to divide it in half for Aida cloth. Well, they don't make a 13 count Aida cloth. So you would know that you would use a 14 count, which is like, this is 14 count. And 14 count is very common, often used in many stitched designs. It's just, you can decide how big of a project you want. So if you want to make a fairly larger project, then you would go with a 14 count. If you want to make a smaller project of the same picture, then you would go for a 16 or 18 count. Or in this case, it would be like a 32 count or something like that. Now they stitch over 2 fabric threads, of course, because they're using linen and using 3 strands of embroidery floss. Now, something I'm going to say to you, and I have found this to be very true over the years, is coverage. And so If you were using 14 count, and I talked a little bit about that when I was wanting to use my sulky thread on certain fabrics, and if you're going to use a sulky thread, you're going to want to use at least a 16 count or 32 count if you're doing linen or even weave for coverage, because otherwise when you're covering your squares with your thread, it's going to look a little more sparse. And if you want really a good coverage that's going to stand out and your piece is going to look more solid, is what I want to say, you're going to want to use 3 strands of thread on a 14 count. So that means on this thread, I know this looks like a mess, but it's 2 different ones here. When you separate your threads, you're going to want to pull three threads instead of just 2, and then you're going to have a much better coverage over this 14 count square. But that's what they mean by the strands. I decided, well, this might be a good time for me to use up some of that coffee fabric and chocolate fabric. They are pretty small pieces. What you are going to tend to find, though, most of the time, patterns that are free are going to be fairly simple. They're not going to be elaborate like this angel, lots of colors, very intricate. You're not going to find these free. You'll have to purchase those, but I'll tell you that Etsy, if you go to Etsy, they have a lot of really nice downloadable patterns that you could get right away and download them. So Etsy is a really good place to buy patterns. So, of course, I said I eliminated this one because it would not fit on these fabrics. And so I decided to do this coffee one first. And then I will probably do this little reindeer. This is definitely small enough. If I wanted to put it in a little frame, I could. I wish that they made more patterns that were like uniform, that would fit in a 5x7 frame or an 8x10 frame and have equal amount on the sides. But those are few and far between. Most cross-stitch patterns tend to have to be custom framed. It's just the way that it works, unfortunately, which is very expensive to frame. But every once in a while you can come up with a pattern that you can make do. It fits pretty decently in a regular frame and is very easy to find those frames at regular stores. And then when I finish this one, I will probably put it in a little frame and either give it away or put it in my kitchen. And this one I'm not going to put in a little frame. I'm going to see if I can't come up with a way to put that on a card and then not have to worry about it. So if you end up with a pattern that, like here, you don't have a count, here it gives you the count. But if you don't have a count, you're going to know that in general, squares are uniform. They're always going to be 10 by 10 by 10 squares, which stand for like an inch. So, but of course, how you print it out, you can't rely on that. So you can't take this pattern and say, okay, this is going to be the exact size of this, because it's not. And especially if you're using a different count. This is just 14 count. But you can also just look at the pattern and count. So if you started here where this is and you said, okay, well 10, 20, 30, 40, and this is 3 over, so you know that's where they got the 43. That's how they count it. 10, 20, 30, 40, and then 3 stitches over. And then the top is 44. So you know this is a full count of 10. So 10, 20, 30, 40, and here you're going 4 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches over. So this is 43 by 44. But technically, you're going to know that if it was inches, this would be 1, 2, 3, 4 inches and maybe 4.5. You could just round it up, 4.5 inches. It's not going to be a half inch, but it's better to be over than under. So let's say this is 4.5 inches. And this, of course, is 1, 2, 3, 4. And this one is probably a good 4.5 inches. So you're going to know it's about 4.5 by 4.5 inches. Now this piece, up until here, because we know we can't use this on this side, is about 7 and 1, 2, 3 eighths. So about 7 3/8 inches. And really you can't use that either, but still the fabric is big enough. So 4 to 7 doesn't give me very much room to frame. But I'm not going to frame it with a mat, and I'm not going to do anything elaborate. So I'll show you what I'm going to plan to do with this later, and then you'll see why it doesn't really matter. But if you were going to do this and frame it, you would say, okay, well, this is 4.5 inches. I've got to add 6 inches to that, which would be 10 inches. And this is definitely, as you can see, not 10 inches. In this direction, I have way more than 10 inches, so I would have plenty of room. So if this was a nice square, it would have been perfect for that if it was this big on all sides, if it measured this much both directions. So here I am looking at, and this is a marbled fabric, and you're going to find lots of places nowadays, even in stores, especially Michael's. I haven't been in Hobby Lobby enough to know, but I know that in Michael's and sometimes even in Joann's, they have marbled Aida cloth. And I haven't really seen any like this. A lot of times they're pastel colors, but you can get a lot of marbled, beautifully marbled, hand-dyed fabric off of Etsy. Or you can do what I did and try it yourself. And I'm probably going to play with that a little bit more with regular dyes and not natural dyes, which is what I attempted here. But if you get one like this, you can decide which side that you want to use. This side, you can see way more of the color variation, and since this is going to be a coffee one, I think that I will make sure that that is on this particular one. And like I said, I'm only going to use this half. If you have your whole picture out and you know that you're doing your picture correctly, which is, like I said, not what I did with my rabbit sampler. My rabbit sampler was a folded piece of paper, and I think I was so focused in what I was watching at the time that I just didn't do it like I should have. And it's the first time, I think I mentioned that too, that I have ever in all my years of doing cross stitch that I ever made that mistake. So I'm just saying, anybody could probably do it. What I was always taught was basically to find the center, fold it in half one way, and then you can see your crease here. Here, you're going to have to remember that you've got this little edge here, so you can't go that far over. You have to come to here. And then again, find your center and then crease it. And so I don't know whether you can see that or not. Let's see if I can get that a little close. But you can see definitely where your center point is. And then what I do most of the time is I will take my needle, and I will, because I'm always worried my crease is going to go away. And see, the center point here is not always going to be, because of the way the Aida cloth is made, going to give you a dead center. So I just pick, one on either side or whatever. And because if you look at the crease, this is actually going right in between 4 squares. So I'm just going to pick one, and that's where I'm going to mark my center. That to me is good enough. Next thing you need to do is find the center of your picture. You know that this one is 44 by 43, and it was 43 this way and 44 that way. So you could just divide it. So you know that 22 is half of 44, so if you went in 22 stitches, you're going to go 10, 20, and then 2 down. So you know that 2 down is about here. So that's going to be your center point coming this direction. 43, so you can't really do you could do a half a stitch, but you might as well just do 44 again. And so 10, 20, 2 is about here. So that's about your halfway point of your picture. Like, I don't know, in between these 2 stitches would be around your center point here. So it doesn't really matter. I'm going to go down to about the one in the middle, because I don't know, it looks better for me, which is about here, and then 2 down and over is about here. So about there is your center point on this particular picture. So that's where you're going to start.